Hello, and welcome to the Actual Tech Media Expert Series. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event on ransomware recovery options, best practices, post-attack. So this is the last in a three-part series walking you through a ransomware attack. We started with ransomware preparation, laying the groundwork in case you're attacked. Then last week, we covered ransomware D-Day. Every minute counts when the org is hit. And those two earlier expert series sessions are available on our YouTube channel, and I highly recommend them. Today, we'll get to what you should do after that initial response, and it's going to be another highly informative session. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have just a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative session for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that come in. That Q&A panel is also the place to just say hello, which a lot of you have been doing already. We love to hear where you're logging in from. And it's also the place to let us know if we can help in the unlikely event that you do have any technical issues. A browser refresh will fix most issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. At the end of this webinar, we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now, these expert series events are special product neutral looks at pressing technology problems presented by an expert in the field, but the support of our sponsors make it possible for us to bring you this content. So we want to give a special shout out to our sponsors. So over the next few slides, I'm going to share some messages from our sponsors today, and they'll refer to links that you can also find in the handout section of your console at any time during the presentation. As always, the handout section also has a few valuable Actual Tech Media links. There's a link to the Gorilla Guide book club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics. There's also a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events, including another expert series event coming up next month. So before we get into the main presentation, a few words from our sponsors. We are supported by CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike delivers rapid technology deployment, real-time response and recovery, and enterprise remediation. CrowdStrike stops breaches. Click on the Start Now button to download the CrowdStrike Incident Report. Today's event is also sponsored by Quantum. Quantum offers data recovery for any tier in the data lifecycle. When ransomware strikes, Quantum solutions allow you to restore your data for any tier in the data workflow. Different capacity tiers give you the flexibility to choose where you want to store your data and how you want to recover it. Learn more about Quantum Ransom Recovery at the link on your screen. This event is also brought to you by Rubrik. Companies around the world rely on Rubrik, the pioneer in zero trust data security, for business resilience against cyber attacks, malicious insiders, and operational disruptions. Rubrik Security Cloud, powered by machine intelligence, enables Rubrik's customers to secure data across their enterprise, cloud, and SaaS applications. Rubrik automatically protects data from cyber attacks, continuously monitors data risks, and quickly recovers data and applications. You can learn more at rubrik.com/ransomware. We are also supported by Duo. Duo Security is now part of Cisco, and it's the leading multi-factor authentication and secure access provider. Duo comprises a key pillar of Cisco's Secure's Zero Trust offering, the most comprehensive approach to securing access for any user from any device to any application or environment. You can try it for free at duo.com. We're also supported by Palo Alto Networks. Palo Alto Networks Unit 42 brings together world-renowned threat researchers, incident responders, and security consultants to create an intelligence-driven, response-ready organization that's passionate about helping you proactively manage cyber risk. You can learn more at paloaltonetworks.com. And finally, this event is brought to you by Equinix. Equinix and Dell Technologies are teaming up to help customers deploy IT infrastructure that provides the greatest flexibility, agility, and scale while ensuring high levels of security and performance for their growing list of demanding workloads. Click the link to learn more. So once again, take advantage of that handout section where you can find all the links that you've just seen. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, Alan Liska. Alan is a renowned ransomware expert. He's written a book on ransomware, among others, one that was published by Actual Tech Media, and he's hard at work on a second edition for us. Alan's presented several of the sessions in our expert series on ransomware, and I'm delighted to have him here for this one. Let me bring Alan on. Alan, welcome.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you. Thank you. Excited to be here.
Thanks for coming on. Yeah, well, take it away because I'm looking forward to your presentation, and then, as always, I'm really looking forward to the Q&A session as well because those are always great. So, have at it.
Yeah, my favorite part of these sessions are the Q&A. I really love the way everybody gets involved, and we really have a good conversation after the slides. So we're going to talk about post-recovery options. So, what happens? You've been hit with a ransomware attack. Kind of, it happened, it's done, it's kind of your worst nightmare, and now you've got to get through it. So we have to go back to before the attack, though, because every successful ransomware incident response that I've been through has been successful because of the prep beforehand. And that generally starts with tabletop exercises. So that is, you have to accept there is a chance that you are going to be hit with ransomware. There are thousands and thousands of attacks every year. And there's a chance that your organization is going to be one of them. So, you have to plan. In the last session, we talked about a ransomware incident response plan. This is your way of testing that. This is the way of making sure that your assumptions are all correct across the organization. And I kind of liken it to a choose your own adventure book. This is your way to, hey, what's going to happen if we do this? What's going to happen if we do this? What's going to happen if we do this? And you get to kind of go through the pages and say, oh, okay, this is what'll probably happen because you'll have all the teams and everybody in place. So this allows you, again, before the ransomware attack, to get other parts of your organization involved. You've probably got certain assumptions about how the IT team will react in a ransomware attack, or how the server team will react, or the networking team will react. This is your way of verifying that your assumptions are correct and that everybody is going to be on the same page. It also helps you, to fully explain the threat involved in a ransomware attack. Scott, you and I, and probably everybody on this call, is kind of knees deep in ransomware all the time. We read about the incidents. We know about what's happening out there. We know some of the challenges that organizations face with recovery, but that's because we're heavily involved in it. The rest of your organization probably doesn't. They're aware broadly that ransomware is a problem, but they are not fully aware of everything. We've been talking, for example, about extortion or double and triple extortion for a couple of years now. There's still organizations that don't understand that, and so that's really important to be able to explain to people that, hey, we're probably going to have stolen data, and what do we do with this when this data they're threatening to leak it? Those kind of things. And this gives you a chance to dry run an attack response and discover flaws in your incident response process. This is never, ever a blame game. This is not trying to say, oh, okay, if something goes wrong, it's going to be this organization's fault. Instead, this is where are the weaknesses and what can we do to make things better. Always feed people during a tabletop exercise. I just let people know you're going to bring people in from all over the company, probably have them in a room for 3 or 4 hours. Just make sure you arrange lunch or something for everybody. Part of that prep has to be your backups. Backups will not solve a ransomware attack. There's too many things going on with data theft and other things. It's not going to be your sort of one-stop solution for a ransomware attack. However, having good backups, having tested those backups, especially having offline backups, so backups that the ransomware actors can't change, what we call immutable backups, whether that's on a tape or whether that's on a disk that can't be written over or whether that's sitting in an Iron Mountain storage facility, is really, really important in testing your ability to recover, and especially testing your ability to recover multiple systems simultaneously. I see this over and over again where people run through exercises and like, oh yeah, I can restore a server in 2 hours. Right, but how long does it take you to restore 200 servers or 2,000 servers or so on? Really understanding the limitations of your backup and making sure that the backups are actually there. That is going to speed up your recovery process by so much if you have a lot of confidence in that. And again, you really, really want to test that. You want to understand, if I've got a mass ransomware event, one, am I absolutely sure that they can't get to my backups and encrypt them? And then number two, how long would it really take me if I have to restore, again, 200 servers, 500 servers, 1,000 servers? Because that is where you're going to test the limits of your backup system to restore files. So again, we're really talking about now kind of choosing your own adventure, and you have to have the good plan in place, and then moving forward. Plus, I really love this as a nod to where most ransomware groups come from in terms of titles. Somebody back in 1980, whatever, when this book was written, really thought ahead to what was going to be happening with ransomware in 2022 when they came up with this title. So kudos to them. So again, if you've been in a call with me, you know this. You know how how ransomware attacks work. A ransomware attack is a multiple stage event, from the initial access, reconnaissance and lateral movement, stealing data, deploying of the ransomware, and then the extortion. I'm not going to dive deep into all of this. Some of the earlier recordings have this, but this is really what you need to keep in mind when you're working on your recovery. And so when you're going through your recovery, you need to think about all phases of the ransomware attack to make sure that you're better compensating or better controlling in your response for all of these phases. Make sure that you've gotten all the PowerShell scripts that they use, and you're not restoring from backup malicious PowerShell scripts or malicious tools that the ransomware actors may have left behind. However they gained that initial access, make sure you are blocking that, whether it's patching an exploitation that was used, whether that's improving your mail security program so the phishing email can't get in. Whatever that is, that's got to be part of your planning for incident response. How are you going to make it better and make sure the ransomware actor can get back? So now we've gotten to the part where we contain the attack. That's what we did last week. We spent a lot of time talking about the containing the attack and beginning the response. But once the attack is contained, you've got to act quickly but thoroughly. So the faster that you can assess the full damage, the faster you can begin the recovery process. And that is both the incident response and disaster recovery. So those are generally two different groups. For some organizations, they may kind of blend together. And certainly after a ransomware attack where it's an all hands on deck situation, you're going to want to have both. But generally speaking, you want to make sure that you thoroughly understand what happened, what needs to be done, and that you have all the forensic information that you need before you start the disaster recovery process. So there is sometimes a bit of a tension because everybody wants to get their services restored. Sales are telling you that it's end of quarter and they need to get they need to get systems back up and running, or they can't close deals. Engineering will tell you that these critical systems are down and we need to get them back up and running and do it quickly. So you're going to have all of these competing things that are going to try and get you back up and running as quickly as possible. And that's right. But you don't want to, in the interest of speed, you don't want to accidentally, again, bring the ransomware actors back to your network or reopen your network so that another ransomware actor can get in there. So you want to be both you want to both be fast, but you want to be thorough, and you want to make sure that there's a clear delineation between when incident response stops and when disaster recovery can start. And the two things can be going on simultaneously. You can clear one section of the network and start the recovery process before you move on to the next section, and so on. So there are different ways to do that. If you don't already have a third-party incident response retainer, you should absolutely get one. A lot of companies will offer a free incident response retainer. Primarily what they want is they just want to get the paperwork out of the way. The last thing you want to do during an incident response when you realize you're in over your head is to be negotiating with an incident response provider over rates, over legal agreements, and so on and so forth. So you want that done ahead of time, um, and don't be afraid to bring in that third party incident response if you have that retainer. Most organizations are in over their head when they're hit with ransomware. And so you're going to want to bring in your third-party incident response as soon as possible, especially because a lot of them are overwhelmed with ransomware attacks right now. And so if you don't call them right away, you don't know how long you're going to be waiting to get somebody on site, and you want them in as quickly as possible. Most organizations, when you have that retainer, will do everything they can to get somebody out to your site as quickly as possible, and likely a team of people out to your site. But again, having that retainer, the scope, the total amount of effort they're going to be able to put in. So bringing them in is going to help. Generally, is going to help your recovery process a lot. Because they've done this. They've done this dozens, if not hundreds of thousands of times. They know the ransomware actors. They know the ransomware groups. They know what tools to look for, what signs to look for. And that's going to help with the forensic response to recovery, and it's going to get you back online sooner rather than later. You also are going to have to think about your legal team. So legal is going to be involved from the start. And in fact, most organizations now not only have their legal team, but there's also an outside legal counsel. There's a really good report from the Foley Law Firm about why it's a quick 3-pager. Doesn't go into super detail, but it gives you enough information. I'm not a lawyer, so not giving legal advice here, but I do think it is important to understand why you may need outside legal counsel, what benefits the outside legal counsel is, and what that means as far as reporting. What gets reported to your internal legal counsel, what gets reported to your outside legal counsel. And you also have to worry about compliance now. So we have a number of ransomware groups that are sanctioned, including North Korea and Iran, which are now heavily using ransomware in their attacks. And so you have to understand what the legal ramifications of paying the ransom are. So there are normal issues with paying a ransom anyway, but especially when you're dealing with the sanctioned entity, there are concerns not just about paying the ransom, but with any communication you may have with those threat actors that are sanctioned. So having your legal team and fully understand what the sanctions against those entities mean for your organization, and what that means in terms of your ability to communicate and work. So again, that should be part of your tabletop exercises to understand this up front. before the attack happens, but then be able to put that plan in place with your legal team as quickly as possible. You're also going to bring your cyber insurance company in. So your cyber insurance company will want to know about the ransomware attack as soon as possible. Again, the cyber insurance companies are dealing with thousands of these attacks. They may offer services that help with recovery. They may offer negotiators, even if you're not planning on paying the ransom. Having a negotiator in place to talk to the ransomware actor, find out exactly what they've stolen from your network, find out any details you may get, be able to get. So having a negotiator provided by your cyber insurance company may be good. If you don't have an incident response firm, they may have incident response companies that you can work with. This is, again, one of those things where you want to find all this out ahead of time. And then really, really important, a lot of cyber insurance companies now will no longer cover ransom payments. So again, needing to know that up front, especially if you think you may have to pay the ransom, knowing that knowing how important it is that exactly what your coverage is, what it covers, what you need to do in order to stay compliant, in order to get reimbursed, is going to be important to know ahead of time, but also why you want to bring them in as quickly as possible when you've had an attack. So really, those kind of are the big things where you really want to have your third party incident response provider on site as quickly as possible. Get your cyber insurance company involved as quickly as possible, because that's going to help smooth over a lot of the work that needs to be done. But you do need to have a quick and thorough response. And that means that, again, when you build this up in your tabletop exercises, you want to mobilize whatever that response team is. So that is going to include, security, obviously, but it's probably going to include IT, networking, and server teams. It's going to include your legal team. It's going to include your human resources team, most likely, because you're going to have to communicate things out to employees. To that end, your PR team has got to be there so they know what to say, so they're not caught off guard when people start complaining on Twitter that they can't access your services or whatever, and then they get a call from reporters. You want to be able to have an answer that your leadership team is signed off on, and be able to share out. You don't have to over communicate, but in my experience, the organizations that have the most success in recovery also have really good communications, both internally and externally. Everybody's hit with ransomware attacks, large companies, small companies. So most people are forgiving of a ransomware attack. What they're not forgiving of is trying to cover up that you were hit with a ransomware attack. So mobilize your response team, keep everybody up to date, especially keep leadership in the loop. You're going to start to have a lot of infighting among departments as you're working, restoring, to get things back up and running. So you're going to want to have your leadership team there to really say, no, this is what we agreed to ahead of time, and this is what we're going to do. If there needs to be a change to the plan, you want to have it approved by leadership. That way, it's not you that's making the call, it's leadership, and that's the way it should always be. It should come down from leadership. Even if you're the one that's saying, yeah, we really need to make this change, if it's communicated via your leadership team, then I think you'll see a lot more success and a lot more acceptance of it. Again, communicate internally and externally. This is really important. I was involved in one incident response where a ransomware attack was stopped before it could do any damage, but out of an abundance of caution, the organization took off some of the potentially impacted servers while they were doing some investigation, and a vendor called into the help desk saying, hey, we can't reach such and such. And the person from the help desk said, oh, yeah, we have a ransomware attack going on, which wasn't true. The ransomware attack had been stopped before any data theft and before any encryption. So the incident response team had done really well in identifying and stopping the ransomware attack, potential ransomware attack early. but what they didn't do was communicate internally. And so the help desk thought there was a ransomware attack happening, shared that with the vendor. The vendor then proceeded to disconnect the company from the network until they got confirmation that the ransomware attack was fully contained. And a lot of vendors are doing that now. A lot of vendors are saying, we don't want to take a chance on your ransomware attack jumping to our network. So they will cut you off until you confirm that everything's been contained. So that internal communication is one of the reasons why it's so very important. And then stick to the plan you developed before the attack. You don't want to go off script, because you'll have a whole lot of people doing a whole lot of things all at once, all working from the same plan. So whenever possible, stick to that plan. Again, things may change. There may be reasons why different parts of the organization need to be prioritized for disaster recovery. If that change happens, it should come from leadership, and you should communicate that updated plan out to everybody involved. And as always with anything, get whatever that update is and whatever the new priorities are in writing, so that again everybody's working from the same page. So again, I want to thank you all. I know, Scott, you've got a bunch of questions lined up, and I'm sure we've got some questions in the chat. But I'd love to see what I can do to help, you know, keep people informed.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, Alan, great presentation. I love that choose your own adventure theme. So appropriate for ransomware. Not just because of the Russian ghost cover, but just that idea of making choices. And it also reminds me of one of my favorite bits of dialogue from a movie called The Counselor. It was a Cormac McCarthy screenplay, but someone's talking about being at a crossroads and thinking they have a choice, but actually the choices were made long before they reached what they think are the crossroads, and they actually have very few choices at that stage. And it seems very similar with post-attack recovery options. Most of the choices were made in the planning stages, or the decision not to do the planning, and in the moments after the attack. And you've talked a lot about that with tabletop exercises and having contracts with outside experts in place, but are there choices that you really need to make in real time after an attack happens that are sort of independent of planning ahead of time? They're things you really can't sort of game out very well, and you just have to be ready.
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to have it's like they say in football, right? The other team has a plan too.
Yeah.
And so you may be the most up to date on what's happening with ransomware groups, and then you get in the middle of your incident response and you find that they developed a new technique. So
Yeah.
there's a new method that they have for persistence, and it's like, okay, now we have to look for that new method of persistence. Or they're using a tool that you'd never seen before. And so now we've got to make sure we're looking for that tool. We had a set of tools we were looking for, and now like we're seeing a big increase in the use of brute retel in ransomware attacks. Kind of a small number of ransomware groups are moving away from Cobalt Strike to brute retel for moving around networks. So maybe you didn't have brute retel in your threat model, and now you're finding that all over your network. So those kind of things, and then the sort of damage that could be unexpected. So last year we saw a lot of ransomware groups develop Linux variants and develop ESXi variants. So maybe you didn't plan to have your Linux team involved in the discussion, and then you get there and find out that this group has a Linux variant and all of your Linux servers are encrypted. How are you going to handle that? One of the things that we've not seen is, for example, a mass encryption of Mac devices. But if you were to be the first one to find out that all of your Macs are encrypted as well as your Windows, you may not have had that in your threat model. And what do you do if all of your Macs are encrypted, and how do you unencrypt it? And finding out how they did that, could be really valuable to your recovery process.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. And one of the things I want to do here is, rather than leave this question slide up, the your advice here was so good. I just want to kind of leave that up in the background so people can just have that as a reference. In one of the things I love about you on is your experience with real incidents response, and and I was going to ask you, do you have any rules of thumb for how long it takes to completely dig out of an incident? And then Nathan also chimed in with a similar question, which is he's wondering what's the average downtime of a ransomware attack. We're looking to write documentation on what downtime looks like to pass off in the event of anything coming up. So, what do you see as far as not just having visible systems up online, but getting everything back to the way that it was, from a technology standpoint, from a business standpoint, from like back to business as usual. How long does that take? Sometimes, in worst case scenarios that you've seen or heard about, how long can it take? Um,
So this has never happened to any of the incidents I've been involved in, thankfully. But I mean, I've seen it as far as some companies that just never recover. I mean, we saw TravelX in the end of 2020 got hit in like December of 2020 got hit with a ransomware attack, wound up in receivership by August. In large part because of the ransomware attack. They just the way they were set up was so bad that they couldn't fully recover.
yeah.
And that and I only talk about that not to shame TravelX, but that's just a very public example of what can happen. Um, I have seen well prepared organizations get most of the critical systems back up and running and kind of hobbling along usually in 1 to 2 weeks, sometimes a little bit earlier, but 1 to 2 weeks is what I usually see. Yeah, it's you like an Indiana Jones movie where 3/4 of the way through he's been shot in the leg, had his arm broken and he's kind of limping along and still and but limping along and still able to beat the bad guys. But that's kind of what I've seen. It usually takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months to get your systems fully up and running, full assessment and so on. Now you're not going to be all hands on deck for 3 to 6 months. That's just not sustainable. Though, as you and I have talked about before, Scott, one thing to keep in mind that there's a lot of burnout after a ransomware attack because those teams are working round the clock for weeks and weeks at a time. So just keep that in mind if you are hit with a ransomware attack. Make sure you're taking care of your people. I always emphasize that because they do burn out. They want to get everything back up and running, but sometimes you kind of just have to send them home, go sleep for 10 hours, then come back so you don't lose your mind. Just go ahead and take this weekend off. We've gotten the worst of it done. Please take the weekend off. Hell, if you can, give them travel vouchers here. Take your wife or your husband away for the weekend and enjoy some time on us. Because we do see a lot of burnout and resignations after ransomware attacks, and so you're
Oh,
going to
wow.
lose people that just help build your network back up, working a whole lot of hours, and you want to do everything you can to keep them. So so anyway, 1 to 2 weeks to sort of get hobbling along, 3 to 6 months to be fully restored. But if you look at like the city of Baltimore when they were hit with their ransomware attack, they said it took them 18 months to get everything fully back and operational. Now, a lot of that though is and I absolutely encourage everybody to take advantage of this. When you're hit with a ransomware attack, it's amazing how much the security budget opens up. Like I know the CISO of Baltimore, she had been trying to get things like MFA and other things implemented for almost a decade and not been able to. Suddenly, she had all the money in the world to build her network back up. And so, again, going back to the $6 million man, she chose to rebuild it better, faster, stronger. And so a lot of that does come from you will have options that you didn't have before. I encourage companies to take advantage of them. Get the basics done first. Make sure you've actually gotten the bad guys out of the network. And then if that new endpoint detection that you've been asking for 2 years is suddenly available in the budget, go ahead and get that. And that is going to be part of the restoration process. You are going to likely have more things to play with, more tools at your disposal. So just keep in mind that some of that is not just restoring systems, but making the networks better. Because if you restore it to exactly the way it was, you're leaving yourself open to another ransomware attack. And there's a statistic from Cylance, and I don't know that I 100% agree with it, but I haven't seen anybody. I haven't seen anybody that's been able to effectively debunk it. But the statistic is something like 80% of ransomware victims are hit by another ransomware actor, not necessarily get everything encrypted, but another ransomware actor finds the same initial access vector within 3 months. So just that's why you don't just want to restore everything, you want to make it better.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's so interesting. I'd love to dig a little bit more into, what happens to you afterward, sort of on the dark web or in these criminal networks when you've been identified. So Jadeep has a question, if what if data stolen through ransomware is spilled on the dark web because they were not paid? Or if the data gets on the dark web, the damage is already done. Is there any way out of this? But I guess to expand on that, like what happens, on that side, on the ransomware actor side, after an event to you.
Yeah.
Like, so let me rephrase that question. So I've been hit by ransomware. I've had some sort of interaction with the ransomware actors. What is happening with my data and with information about me on the dark web?
Yeah. So I think Jadeep is very smart and very insightful in that once your data is stolen, assume that it's going to be gone. In fact, we've seen this, like PISA, one of the ransomware groups, where they claim that they delete your data in a data dump that was discovered of theirs. What they had was an animated GIF that looked like files being secure deleted. So what they would do is they would play that animated GIF and then not actually delete the files. So even if you pay to have your files deleted, likely they aren't being deleted. What you're really paying for is to not have them publicly displayed somewhere. But either the ransomware actor may use them down the road, they may wind up being sold in a private auction, something like that. But you should assume, unfortunately, once data is stolen, it's going to be out there forever. And that's unfortunately the reality of the situation. I mean, we see that it's especially bad with schools, where sensitive student data is released to these on these data leak sites, and there's literally nothing we can do about it. And so these students are hurt through no fault of their own.
Gotcha. And Jadeep had another question earlier. He was wondering if encrypted backups can be stolen and decrypted, for example, by using resources of a high-tech rogue state. Do you know of any cases where that's happened?
No, I've not seen anything. I've seen encrypted backups stolen because the bad guys don't know what they're getting, and so they steal the encrypted backups. I've never seen a case where the encrypted backups are then decrypted and listed. Now, if it is a rogue state, if it's Iran or North Korea, then they may not go up on the open market, and so we may not know. It's unlikely. And this is something where, again, that prep that we talked about, talking to your backup provider, what ensures that the encrypt, because you're not going to break the encryption by, you're generally not going to break the encryption by trying to crack the key. So, can it be broken because there's a weak password? So, like if the encrypted backups are encrypted with admin123 as a password, then maybe that way it could be broken. The encryption could be broken, but it's unlikely that the actual encrypted files themselves could be broken. Maybe a weak passkey would be one way, but that's where you want to talk to your backup provider and find out the best practices to ensure that can't happen.
Okay. All right, great. Um, so there was a question here. Oh, okay. Anthony has a question. He's asking, who do you recommend for incident response? And I don't want to put you on the spot of, recommending a particular vendor, but are there types of companies that provide incident response?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the big ones that everybody knows are Mandiant and CrowdStrike, and both of those companies are excellent. You're going to pay for them uh, um, uh, a lot, but they're really, really good, and there's a reason why they command such high dollars. But I would also look at if you have a managed security services provider or managed detection and response provider. Often they offer incident response services as well. So companies like Red Canary, Arctic Wolf, places like that, I think a lot of people undervalue the incident response services those companies have, and they provide and they provide excellent service as well as excellent managed services as well.
Okay. All right, great. We have another question. The wall behind Alan says he's a ransomware sommelier. What flavor of ransomware does he serve? But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that sign's about.
Sure. So this came from Sean Lingus, who's a reporter for CNN. He referred to me in an article. He blanked on my name or blanked on my title. And as a placeholder, he put in ransomware connoisseur, and somehow that made it through all of the editors and actually got published in a news story. And I wrote back to him and I said, no, really what I do is I pair ransomware with weaknesses in your network. So I'm more of a ransomware sommelier than a ransomware connoisseur. So, if you don't use multi-factor authentication, here have some lovely Lockbit. If you haven't patched anything in 2 years, have some Black Basta, that kind of thing. So like a true sommelier, I pair the ransomware with the weaknesses in your network.
Question here from Nathan. If you have a SIM and IPS system in place, should those companies or vendors also be involved in a ransomware response? Do you need to loop them in, or is it helpful?
So generally, I don't get SIM vendors involved in a ransomware incident. With your IDS, it depends on the company. A lot of them do some really cool things uh, uh, with maybe even helping out with instant response, but certainly have a lot of advice. So I absolutely would. I'll tell you this. Um, I love to bring in security vendors, generally not SIMs because it's a little bit different. But if I'm in the middle of an incident response, um, and there's anything that a security vendor can do to help me, every time I've used one, I've always gotten really good response from them. One of the things that we do, I think, really well in the security community, security vendor community, is when one of our customers is hurt, we jump in to help without, trying to nickel and dime. Not everybody is like that, but I think most vendors are willing to, yeah, we'll send in whatever we can to help you and give you whatever advice we can. And so, yeah, IDS, especially EDR, antivirus, any of those kind of internal looking network security tools. Absolutely. I would, if you're in over your head, if you're having problems, reach out, call them, see what they can do to help.
Okay. You know, you mentioned PR a couple of times, and I'm sure there are PR professionals with established playbooks. But just in your experience, from viewing a lot of tracking a lot of these attacks, in the news as well as your personal experience with some, what are some of the PR best practices that you've seen as far as managing the public reaction to your incident?
Yeah. So the best practices are to be honest without oversharing, which I think is a great advice for life in general. But during an incident, especially, obviously clear everything with the legal team and the and the people working, that sort of that core group. Um, but if you've had an incident, we've had an incident. Share as much as you can, without giving away anything that's going to hinder your response or freak people out. But I think the way most people look at it is, if you're being honest and as open as you can about an incident response, then your clients, your partners, your shareholders are going to have a lot more confidence in your ability to recover. Because if you can get to the point that your PR person is fully informed on what's going on and has a statement ready, then that means that you're on top of the incident response. At least that's been my experience. That means that you know what's going on. You have your legal team involved. They're ready to sign off on whatever is going to be communicated out, and and you're kind of you're taking a lead role in sharing information, not just relying on what's out on Facebook or Twitter or broad gossip.
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense. Um, Next question here from Theodore, who's wondering how likely are companies who were hit to get hit again?
Yeah. So again, that silence statistic is 80% of people who are hit with ransomware are hit a second
80%.
time.
Okay.
80%. I don't. I have trouble believing that, but again, I've not seen anybody who's been able to say that that's wrong with any kind of authority. Um, I will say it's a lot. I mean, we've seen dozens of companies hit with ransomware and then hit a second time, within the span of a couple months of each other. I mean, just last year, the Toll Group in Australia was hit twice with two really bad separate ransomware attacks. Um, what I'll say is, if during your incident response you make it a priority to plug however the ransomware actor got in, so if you exploited a vulnerability, killing that so that they can't, patching it so they can't get back in. If they did credential reuse, making sure you quickly enable multi-factor authentication or kill the account that was used. The faster that you can plug the hole, the harder it is for another ransomware actor to follow down that hole.
Okay. And sort of by way of a last question, I know you keep track of ransomware payments that go out. I'm wondering what you're seeing in terms of trends. In the amounts that are being paid, and um, if there are percentages on how many people are paying. Obviously estimates, but what are you
Yeah.
seeing in terms of the payments?
I was having a really good discussion with a researcher from Sophos the other day about this, because Sophos is seeing an uptick in ransomware payments. So they had seen, I think their number was like 42% of victims paid the ransom. That's a lot higher than what we see.
Okay.
Our numbers generally around 25%. But I think the difference is in the size of the victim that we're looking at versus what Sophos is looking at. So we tend to be at Recorded Future and the researchers I work with tend to be looking at larger organizations with bigger security budgets. And so they may not need to pay because they're already protected and well resources. I got the impression from talking to this, and obviously he couldn't share any client data, completely understand that they were looking at smaller businesses. So, Scott, you and I have talked about this before, but some of the biggest upticks in terms of verticals that we've seen this year are real estate offices, auto dealerships, and dental offices. So large businesses for their communities, but what we typically think of as smaller businesses. You go
Right.
to any town, and the auto dealership may be one of the largest employers, still not considered a large employer by them. And these tend to be 40, 50, maybe $60,000 ransoms, sometimes 100,000, although it doesn't usually get that high. And that
Mm-hmm.
may be where we are seeing an uptick. So ransomware actors are going downscale a little bit. They're also going upscale, taking out whole governments, but that's a different story. So they're going downscale a little bit and downscale in their ransom demands. And if these organizations don't have the resources, don't have the ability to better protect against they may have to pay to keep their business from going under. And so that may be the discrepancy that we're seeing. Generally, we see about 25% pay, but I wanted to throw that extra number out there because I thought that was an interesting divergent statistic.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, thanks for all that context. I really appreciate that because I know how closely you track it. So it's really valuable to hear from you what you're seeing. I think we're going to need to leave it there, Alan. So thanks as always for coming on and for giving such a great presentation. I always learn a lot, and I think the audience does too. We got a lot of great questions today, so really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And thank everybody for attending. It's always appreciated. And I love these conversations. This is my favorite part of doing these. I wish we could just sit and talk for an hour like this, answering questions, because they're always so good.
Yeah. All right. Well, Alan, I'm going to let you go, but thanks again for being here.
Take care.
All right. And before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. It's the $300 Amazon gift card prize drawing. The winner of that prize card today is Mark Sokolowski from Pennsylvania. So congratulations to Mark. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank our sponsors for making this event possible. That was CrowdStrike, Quantum, Rubrik, Duo, Palo Alto, and Equinix. And thanks as always for attending. And as Alan and I talked about, thanks for your great questions. They do really power these conversations and make them, so much more valuable. So that concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.